much for joining us this evening.
Dissect a few more frogs. They touched a lot on very serious matters. Very serious matters, questions of meaning, questions of death, questions of longing. And the one question that I want to start with is, Freud lost his grandson, Heinrich. The boy was 5 years old of tuberculosis. I happen to have a 4-year-old son, and I will come back to the 5-year-old a few times during this talk. When he lost his grandson, he wrote in a letter that all joy had left him from now on. He had some other grandchildren, but this was his favorite grandson. And he was like a broken man at that point. In the same year, a few months earlier, he was first misdiagnosed. His illness was not diagnosed as cancer, but he actually had cancer of the mouth. And a series of operations started. 16 operations throughout his whole life. He suffered from cancer for a very long time. His daughter, we heard one of his favorite daughters, Sophie, died in 1920. I'm saying this because the year that this play is situated, in 1939, on the 3rd, when Britain and France declare war on Germany, it's that day, the 3rd of September. A year later, Lewis published his book, The Problem of Pain. And in that book, The Problem of Pain, Lewis, he wrestles with it. He's trying not to give a pat answer to the question of suffering. But he really ends up giving a pat answer. And he basically is saying in this book, The Question of Suffering, that the question of pain, in a nutshell, that it's a result of the fall, sort of the Christian doctrine, that we somehow verge from sin, and so therefore suffering has to do with us choosing to relate to nature in a certain way, and so on. Fast forward, 1961, Lewis' wife, whom he had married just 4 years earlier, she had died in 1960. In 1961, he publishes his book, A Grief Observed. And in that book, he takes a very different take on this. In that book, he will speak of his darkest moments when he was in grief. He will speak of the cosmic sadist, and he published it under a pseudonym. It was not published under his name until 1963 when he died, November 22nd. So Lewis himself, in that book, A Grief Observed, expresses a lot of the ideas that in the question of pain in 1940, he said were really not questions to be entertained and so on. In 1940, he basically talked about that suffering was, sort of as we heard in the play, a tool. But what kind of tool would it be? He didn't think that suffering is a good thing. And he didn't think that God desires it. What he thought is that God somehow can use it to build character. Right. But the way he thought of it, he distinguished, and we will get to love. The question of love is very, that's where I'm heading here. I'm heading toward love. Because when we want to get away from dissecting frogs, we may actually have to go with, well, why do we in the first place think about meaning and God and so on? And it really has to do with love, and both of these authors talked a lot about love and wrote about love. But Lewis thought that kindness is something that anyone can give. And kindness he thought of as a form of, you just make people happy. But it doesn't really necessarily build their character, it doesn't really necessarily is invested in their value. Kindness you can just show to a stranger, but it isn't the same thing as love. Love, instead, may be something that you may make tough decisions, you may sometimes say no to people and so on, and love on some level respects the other more. That's how he thought of it. Now Freud obviously would have thought, as you heard in the play, that's a bunch of baloney, right? Freud thought, you're just justifying some idea of suffering that actually creates more suffering. Freud thought that we believe in a God because of the nature of suffering that we're facing. And now he probably had something there, because anthropologists have shown us that we started believing in God. There are a lot of ideas why we started believing in God. Fertility, cannibalism, hunting and so on, so you pick your choice. But one of them is, whatever suits you, right? One of them is burial rites. That about 300,000 years ago we started creating burial rites. And there's a wonderful finding that anthropologists discovered in Kefsa in Israel, where a mother and a child were buried about 100,000 years ago. And what we find there is red ochre as part of the ritual. Now anthropologists think that that is one of the earliest signs where we actually started believing that there's more to life than death. That somehow those people started believing that this closeness doesn't stop, this love doesn't stop when we die. There was the beginning of that. So Freud, you know about Freud and the exalted father and the longing for all of that, right? But where he came from that as believing that we're struggling with this pain. We're struggling with nature, we're struggling with each other. And then, as he then later developed in 1923, really his idea of a superego, then we struggle under our own morality. The suffering comes from within. And he thought that religion is the main culprit in making that happen. That somehow religion and morality got into cahoots with each other and sort of banged us down, right? Now, C.S. Lewis actually thought about that question as well, and he argued at one time against psychoanalysis there. He said that, well, actually, morality, if you tell people that they are wanting to endow morality with the numinous, they would probably all say, well, no, because we don't like a law in the first place, so why would we make it even bigger? So that was sort of Lewis' way of arguing. Lewis loved to dissect frogs too. It wasn't just Freud who went for this. One question that I want to get to is the question of the meaning of life. Freud in Civilization Its Discontents was addressing that question. Does it make sense to ask that question? Is there a meaning of life? And Freud argued, no, that's a nonsensical question from a scientific point of view. And he said on some level it's presumptuous, it's expressing hubris, because if we want to have a special place in the universe, what about animals, right? Mm-hmm. So he said the most we can do is sort of observe what people do and think that their purpose is. And his answer was, we want pleasure. We're looking for happiness. So that's what we're going for. His famous pleasure principle, right? Mm-hmm. Lewis, on the other hand, argued our purpose in life is to seek for a creator and to be in relationship with that creator. Now what I'm trying to get at by telling you all these things, dissecting frogs when it comes to talking about God or the life of the meaning of life or love, it doesn't really get us too far. It is a very objective way of inquiry. Very objectively thinking. And let me illustrate what I mean by that. I want to actually bring a third person into the conversation. And that person is someone that is as famous and as well-known and as widely published in Germany and Europe as C.S. Lewis and Freud were at their time. And his name is Eugen Drewermann. It's like written with Drew and then E-R-M-A-N-N. And he's a guy who has written 80 books, several volumes on the question of religion and science and so on. And in a small book on cosmology and the question of God, Drewermann gives this example to help us understand the difference between this objective kind of inquiry around God and meaning and a subjective kind of inquiry that is not just merely subjective. And now we come back to the 5-year-old. If a 5-year-old asks you, why do I exist? My boy is 4 years old. Next year he might ask me that question, right? So if I take the objectivist or objective kind of approach, I would go ahead and say, well, let me think. Every woman has 400,000 eggs. About 400 in her life cycle will come to fruition. And so one of those got together with a sperm out of millions of sperms that your father had, in this case me, right? If it's my 5-year-old boy. And that's why you're here. Is that why my son or any child at 5 years would ask that question? No, right? And would you give that answer? No. I hope not. Otherwise you come and see me, right? Because I'm a psychoanalyst and I also teach in the seminary counseling. That's why I'm here, I think. And I studied at the institute that, I'll just put that in, that Theodor Reich founded in New York. Theodor Reich was one of the earliest students of Freud. And he is the very reason why there are people that are not medical doctors who became psychoanalysts, because Theodor Reich was not a medical doctor. So, you don't answer the question that way, because why? What is the child asking for?
Meaning.
Yeah, but why do you think I exist? And so our answer probably would be something like, because I love you. Because I love you. And that is what a child is looking for. If your lover asks you that question, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for frogs. Dissecting them, by the way, I'm a vegetarian, so I sort of struggled with using that metaphor, but it can serve its purposes. So that is the reason why we ask, why do I exist? Now, love is a tricky thing, right? Because love is fragile. Love is fragile. And so, what ground does my love have that I say I have? How can I base my life, the meaning of my life, on love? This goes back to the longing that we heard about. We heard Louis's mother died at age 9. His father, he describes him as very, very up and down emotionally. And he talked about that he could not trust his own feelings. He had to relearn trusting his feelings. Freud, anyone who knew him, was pretty, I mean, the actors here, they really portrayed these folks very well. I really want to thank you. The problem of God, I want to suggest, is a problem of love, of whether love can be believed. We don't ask, even C.S. Lewis was saying that we can't prove God from nature. He was sort of driven screaming to believe in God. We don't believe in God to explain anything in the universe. It's not a theory to explain things. Explain the objective reality. Whenever we turn it that way in science, in politics is the worst, we have an election year, so we all know about that, right? We just end up dead, basically. We kill the whole thing. The question of God came about because we wondered, is there really a reason to believe in love? Is there anything to this love? Is there anything substantial to it? Or, 20 days after this time period here, Freud died. By the way, I need to, since I'm a psychoanalyst and I know a little bit about Freud, I need to make 2 corrections. Freud's daughter Anna knew that he was going to take his life. She just didn't want him to do it right there and then. And the other thing is, Freud's father did actually not get assaulted by someone in the street while he was walking with Freud. It was actually, he was walking with Sigmund, and he told him the story that this had happened to him earlier in life. And Sigmund Freud lost respect at that point for him. Now, I want to point out that Christopher Hitchens, how many of you know Christopher Hitchens? Yeah, Christopher Hitchens, one of the great atheists of our time, died last December. In a piece in the Atlantic Monthly, published last year in May, where he talks about the poetry of Philip Larkin, he ends the piece with the line, "What will survive us is love." And in a New York Times interview, he actually said that he was very pleased with finishing this piece if that were to be his last piece written. He believed in love. Probably the most heart-wrenching play that has problematized the question of love and God and so on is The Plague by Albert Camus. And in the plague, Dr. Rieu, it's not a play, it's a novel. Dr. Rieu and Father Panalou and Rambert, a journalist, they all are there seeing people just dying like flies. And there is a 5-year-old that Dr. Rieu is asked to treat. And the 5-year-old slowly dies. And he can't do a thing because they don't have supplies. The city is quarantined, city of Oran. And so Father Panalou sort of argues like C.S. Lewis in 1940 in The Problem of Pain. Somehow God can use this. Dr. Rieu has nothing of it. And he says, no, we cannot do anything like that. Then Rambert asks, well, what gets you through? What gets you through? Why do you keep fighting? And he says, well, it's because of common decency. Common decency. And then Rambert says something to the effect that somehow maybe he sort of had suicidal feelings. Maybe I should just give up my belief in love. And Dr. Rieu says, no, don't give up. Don't give up your belief in love. If we could just get rid of that conceptual fetishism of dissecting frogs in religion, if we could see it more as poetry, we could look more at the experiences. What would happen if it couldn't be used to destroy people, but instead we could see that we're all somehow trying to feel a love that actually has some reality to it. Whether you call it humanism, whether you call it religious faith, the only question is, can we as humans, for me anyway, can we as humans, can we really just stay, well, we'll just believe in love when we constantly feel disappointed? Is there anything that grounds our implication that even with Christopher Hitchens, that love somehow survives? What gives us that belief? Okay, I think I should stop. I would like us to have a frank discussion. I personally think it's a very inspiring play. And if the actors want to tell us about sort of their experience of their roles, because you're closing the play tomorrow, I believe, and what was this like for you to play? If you want to come up here, and then we can engage in the discussion together. Good to meet you too.
Somebody needs to take the couch.
Yes. That's it, right. I'll take the couch, right?
Yeah, do you want to put here?
Oh, I'll sit on the couch. It's very low, right. Yeah, well, you know, in psychoanalysis you go very low. In order to go up, of course, right? Yeah. So, yeah, Dr. Freud.
Yeah. Yeah, doctor?
Yeah. I heard you say...
Now we observe.
Yes, yes, I heard you say Danke.
I did.
And you know, I'm originally from Germany.
Yeah,
ich spreche Deutsch, ja genau.
No, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like playing Freud?
I love it, I have to say, because, well, I love doing the show with Scott. You know, it's a journey for both of us, so it only is actually complete when the other actor is completing the other actor, as far as I'm concerned. It's not an individual journey, but it gave me an opportunity to do more research into Freud. I mean, I had a very cursory, and I still do, but I did some research, and as Scott did with C.S. Lewis, and you know, I dealt with some of the issues that he's talking about, and I love playing them because it's a real conflict in that character. I don't know that he ever resolved anything, but like Christopher Hitchens, he went to his grave still a confirmed atheist. But there may be, and that's maybe what the final moment of the play is, that there may be an inkling of a doubt, you know, that he's maybe not totally sure. But what I really enjoyed was that story about his father. In the research I did, which you're of course accurate on, that dictated the rest of his life. And so I'm an emotional actor, so I love being able to play the emotion of Freud instead of just the cold, what might be perceived as this disassociated person.
Right.
And because this is his personal world, this is his home, and his relationship to Anna is very profound, I think, in his life. And so, and you know, I have children, and you know, a lot of this means a lot to me in terms of what happened, and that whole question of why does a young person die? How can that be in the illogicality of the whole world? That's a wonderful place to explore. And then I found it ironic, I don't know if you did, but Hitchens died of mouth cancer. And I just found that incredibly ironic, you know, because like Freud, he was an atheist. And that doesn't mean they're connected, but I thought, wow, what a coincidence. Yes, if you're an atheist, look out.
You're too outspoken about your atheism.
Well, Hitchens stopped smoking.
Yeah, he did.
Which Freud
Freud never did.
Yeah,
Freud never
that's
did.
right. Yeah.
So there's lots of things, and turn it over to Scott, but physically and everything, it's one to take that journey.
Well, and I played Lewis, and that was, yeah, well, all you have to do is go back and listen to one of his recordings, one of his broadcasts from the BBC, and that's, I mean, one day I started listening, and I looked at how much time had elapsed. At one point I just happened to look up, and minutes, like just minutes had gone by, because he just gets right to it, and it was amazing. I just was, I found him so eloquent, and I was not really very familiar with a lot of his stuff before. I mean, I knew about Narnia, but I don't know that I had ever finished any of the books or anything like that. And I just found myself much more interested anyway in the apologetical stuff as I worked on this. And I don't know, I mean, I really related to it because I struggled, I would imagine that most of us in this room struggled a lot with our faith at one point or another, or continue to do so. And my journey was very similar to his, in the sense that there came a moment when I was just like, okay, what do I know? What have the facts told me? And I include in that the facts of my life, what I have lived. And then I just sort of, I went from there, and I did come to a point where I was like, where I sort of thought, I think it's just whether you believe or disbelieve, because I believe that Jesus Christ actually did exist and everything. I don't know, maybe I don't know. So it's just a joy to play him, and it is fun. We know each other very well, I think, and so it's easy to work off of one another. It's fun, and
yes, great.
And thanks. And so that's that. I certainly don't know as much as most of the people in this room probably do about Lewis or Freud or psychoanalysis or anything like that. But it's a true joy I've loved playing Lewis.
Great, great.
Do you know that I couldn't do the same research, which I was so envious of Scott, because you could hear some things. There's only like a 30-second, you probably know this, clip of Freud, and he sounds like up here. He's way up here like this. Play him like that for 90 minutes. So, you know, I went, oh, okay. And I wonder if you were being having a session with him, he said, and how old were you then?
You got to complain like this now.
Yeah,
Right, good, yeah. Very good. Why don't we open it to the audience? What were some of your questions maybe that came out? This play really comes out of a book by Armand Nicoli, who published in 2002 the book Question of God. And then PBS made a recording of that, also under the Question of God, which you can find in libraries or online.
Yeah, I got it as an audiobook, and I actually listened. I live in Lafayette, so driving back and forth, I listen to it all the time. It's a fabulous book.
Yeah.
And then we went, oh, the play is in the book. It is right out of the book.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that's what it is.
Yes.
I've forgotten the name of the actor who plays Mr. Lewis. How did you come about the scene in which he talks about his conversion? That was very interesting. How does this man, learned man, literary guy, all of a sudden he goes off on a motorcycle and then decides, gee, I'm going to change my whole life 180 degrees. How did you come to that?
Well, my name is Scot, by the way, and my interpretation is that he sort of lays it out after he mentions the whole trip to the zoo. He lays out this sequence of events that he read Chesterton's book that made him take pause and realize, you know, that it just was a very interesting metaphor, the boy and the giant and living on the giant's graveside and everything. Then there were the two conversations with Tolkien and Weldon. And I think that what happened, I mean, my interpretation, again, I don't know for sure, but I think that what happened that day is that it just was a bit of an epiphany for him. That he had been mulling over this stuff for a while, and he sat with it, as we all sit with things sometimes, and it stewed, and I think that he just realized by the time he got to the zoo, although I did read somewhere that he actually was on his way home from the zoo, but and when he got home he decided it, and it's, again, I take it back to my own journey. I mean, I kind of went with that because I think that there have been moments where I've had pretty profound epiphanies, whether it's about what I believe in God or Christ or any other faith. I think that I just have had those moments where I have been mulling over something and suddenly I'm just kind of hit within me. I know something to be true. Maybe I've been denying something for a long, long time, and suddenly it just hits me. No, this is what it is. I think it's just kind of funny, the anecdote that he tells. I think it's charming, and but in my interpretation of it was just, that's all it was he had been stewing over all this stuff for a while, and I don't think that he really put a lot of drama into it. You know, I don't think that he was stressing himself out much over it. He was confirmed in total disbelief, as he says. But he had a lot of respect for the people around him, including Tolkien, of course, and there it was.
Yeah, may I add something there? His conversion to Christianity, which happened in 1931, came 2 years after he had started believing in God. So he first became a theist, and then it took a while where he was sort of searching for, well, what would be the right religion? and he considered Hinduism actually at one point. And he looked at several religions and he decided that that was too primitive for him. But one of the reasons that kept Lewis wondering about his atheism is that there were these, as the play also shows, that there were these similar myths in different religions, especially the myth of death and resurrection. And so that was one thing. The other thing that kept bothering him was the question of morality, of good and evil. And that was probably more the move toward theism. He wanted to believe that there is some real good in the world. And if there were any real good, there is some common moral law, like that we all have a sense of right or wrong. He somehow thought there must be something to it. We can't just make it up. Then Tolkien is the one who, in a way, I think was very influential. One of the conversations he had was, well, you know, these are all just myths. And he said, well, just because it's a myth, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's just like, you know, just because we have a longing for something, this is what the play is trying to bring out, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But the question of what does exist, or what we long for and what does not, is something the play problematizes.
Yeah, I had forgotten that he did. I do remember specifically reading that the moment that he actually knelt down to pray, and that was very different than when he decided that he was a Christian. I had forgotten about that. And if you go back and listen to, on YouTube, that's where I found some of these broadcasts that later became Mere Christianity. He started compiling them and they turned into Mere Christianity. He lays out, that's how I became so engrossed in it, is that he lays out very logically the idea about, like, well, if there is a good, then there is a bad. I mean, there can't be one without the other. And he goes from there to the idea of a God. So,
I'll tell you something I learned which was new to me, and I think, personally, this is personal, I think it had a lot to do with Freud's beliefs. And that was the extreme anti-Semitism that he lived in his entire life. And that had come, you know, this is how, you know, I think I'm a professor. I think I'm educated. And then I go, what? I didn't even know that before Hitler, in the 30s, Austria was extremely anti-Semitic for many, many years before that. So living in that pressure cooker, if you will, I think he must have really struggled with a belief, I think, in a higher power. Because he was always ostracized. He was always the minority, you know. And then I found it fascinating that his medical beliefs, how they evolved from scientific, well, it was always scientific thought, but how he tried to take scientific thought and put it to psychoanalysis, and that intrigued me. But the other thing that I found, this is Scott has talked about a little bit, for me, I'm still struggling, because I was brought up an Irish Catholic, and I left the church at 18 because I could not accept the dogma. I actually enjoy saying that line about imperious dogma because I still feel it. And I can hear my mother.
Are they related?
No, she was the saint. But anyway, so I struggled for long, and actually a priest told me something that stayed with me in this production. He said, young man, because here's how I did not break so free of it. I mean, they always say, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. I went to confession to leave the church. I mean, that was just odd to me. It's like I still needed approval. Okay, it's all white clean now, and I could go and do something else. And the priest said to me, and they were very profound words, and I said to him, why didn't you say this earlier? He said, never stop questioning on your journey. And that stayed with me, and I never have. So I find it, still a big struggle. I am extremely logical, and I'm a contradiction. I'm very emotional, and at the same time I'm very in love with deductive reasoning and logic. And when you come up against the Bible with that, it's a hard way out. You can't get there, I'll tell you. But I'm also struggling with something that maybe other people are. I don't want to be a deathbed convert, if I can put it very bluntly. Yes. I don't have much respect for that. And not, I don't blame the person's dying, they can do what they want, but I'd rather not be that. I'd rather have come to something if I'm going to before that happens. So, you know, all of this is stirred up by the production in a wonderful way. Really makes you think about a lot of things. And I think the contrast between C.S. Lewis and Freud, and listening to, and all the research, I'm certainly going to be doing more of it. I'm going to be reading much more of C.S. Lewis and that wonderful book that you talked about, the one that puts both their arguments side by side.
The Question of God.
Yeah.
There was a question here.
Oh, I just had a comment about the play. Something that really struck me about the characters, about the way that you guys played the characters, but believably so, is C.S. Lewis. He's a younger guy, and he's got that air. I thought you played it well, that he's got this kind of, there's a sense of privilege to him, almost like this, there's this, I don't know, superiority is not the right word, but it's like this authority?
I don't know if it's, I'm not saying superiority like he's actually superior. I mean more kind of like when people are able to stand in belief, there's a certain kind of like you're in a safe place.
It's confidence, isn't it?
It's a kind of a confidence, but it's like
Grounded?
You're lucky. Privilege.
Yes.
It's luck.
Yes.
It's lucky. You know, it's like, it's actually pretty, there's a lot of suffering in agnosticism, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety in belief too, but it's on the fringes of your experience. It's not in this you have that central thing as a bulwark in the anxieties of life. So I think that I've experienced, especially among young Christians or young believers of whatever religion, there's this like, it's not really arrogance, but it's like a little bit of a privilege sense, and it's one of the things that make people convert, because people want to feel that, and I'm not criticizing it, actually, I really am not. It's just something that like, it's like some kind of function that is played out when people are in that place.
I agree.
And so you like, he can come in, he's a young buck, you know, like he has had some pretty serious experiences, but you know, he still has a long life ahead of him. He's not facing any kind of imminent mortality in the same way as Freud. And
How fascinating you say it, because one of the things that really struck me is that Freud died at 83, C.S. Lewis died at 64. So he did not have that long life ahead of him, and he didn't know.
right.
Not quite as long.
Not quite as long.
And I mean, that's totally I don't have any idea. But I guess
I
I've
agree.
experienced that among like people that easily believe, or not
Yes.
easily believe, but are lucky to have reached a place of confidence in their belief, because it makes life so much more, like, it seems to make life, it seems to be such a relief, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I struggle quite a bit with jealousy and envy, and some years ago when I was in college, I had conversations with people who were really very secure in their faith, and I was struggling so much, and I was really jealous, and I was upset. I was really upset because I saw what they had and I didn't know how to attain it. And I would like to think that over the years it's actually grown, and it's interesting because it does kind of happen if you are lucky enough to grow more secure in your faith and more certain of your beliefs, or certain of, your faith. I totally agree with you. It's a fascinating thing, and I'm not done being jealous, because I'm not done questioning, and I still look around at people and think, God, you just have it all wrapped up in it's some God thing.
I mean, but Freud has his own advantage also, but it's different. That's the one that just struck me.
I think one of the things that the play put out there a lot is, though, how religion can be used, and very often is used, to inflict harm. And how a certainty, what differentiates a certainty that gives strength and real relief or something like that from something that kills 6 million Jews, right? Or I think that's a big question of what I have a book out called A Violent God Image, because I think there's a lot of that out there, violent God images. And this play sort of thinks about, what do we do with this? What is that all about?
I'll be honest, one of the things that's very troubling to me and continues to be and has been for years is violence in the name of religion.
Yes.
It's so disturbing to me that, and people, have a belief in God. I go, are you kidding me? When people use God to harm other people so much? And that there's a side that doesn't harm, in terms of belief. But man, my sister's born again, and we've had some really interesting talks about it. Because anything that is black and white, that's why I love saying that line. You with a man of such intelligence, you see the world in black and white when there are 1,000 colors around you. No nuance. And so the big thing for me is about tolerance. And many religious beliefs just can't be tolerant. And if you can't be tolerant, then we're doomed anyway. It's just ongoing violence. That's me. That's my little...
Very good. I'm mindful of the time. There are 2 more questions. Why don't we do that? There was one here and then one here.
I was just going to speak to what you were saying about the what sometimes appears to look like faith. I wonder is more about like being invited to something, and it's kind of like it doesn't seem to function the same way as a faith that would include everyone and be loving to everyone, but sort of I have this sort of invite. And part of the stability about it is knowing that people are excluded. Certain kinds of people are not allowed. So it does do this dividing thing between this supposedly good people and supposedly bad people, and I'm in with the good people, so it makes me feel more secure. And that kind of arrogance that you spoke of just made sense. So.
Yes, thank you.
Mine was more just, I think the humor was just awesome in that, I didn't really, I guess I didn't know that much about Freud, because I just thought this stuffy, know-it-all, and, the whole sex thing, and ego and all that, and it was very, but immediately, because again, that thing, you came in very, I've got this, and you're just, kind of a little bubbly and nerdy, or finding things, and then they were so respectful, and I felt like many times, kind of visually or whatever, that they kind of tiptoed up to this edge that they could both look over, like, oh, I'm kind of seeing a little bit of your world, and then they kind of back down, and we got really close, or I won one there, but that doesn't happen. That's, I think, one of the things I don't like about, religious writer, very strong, people, God told me this, and I can go kill people because, God told me, or that, we're right and you're wrong. There's some, and then the war, I had no idea, the bombs are coming in, the thing with the gas mask, and, here we we could have been bombed, they're all responding to that, and then he goes into the fartist, and it's like, oh my God, it was so classic, and then, the blood pouring out, he's gonna, I really didn't think you were gonna walk out, though, and leave him until his daughter came, and I kept thinking, oh, come on, he's gonna come back, something's gonna happen, and then the music was a lovely ending.
Well, I love his sense of humor because it's like Irish humor, it's gallows humor.
Yes.
And it does save you. It does save your sanity, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And also C.S. Lewis has a sense of humor. They're very, I find that the exchange of wit, I really appreciate it. It's very intelligent, but it's very human in terms of the humor. And, they were affected by things, this dog Yofi, I found out, and Scott knows it, I am a over-the-top dog lover. I'm a yellow lab, Murphy. I always think of Murphy when I say Yofi. Well, those things meant a huge thing to him in his life, and his grandson and his other daughter and all those. He's very human, very affected emotionally. So it opened it up, just allowed that to happen.
Speaking to what you said about the disagreement, but in a very civil way, that was actually one of, I'm looking for producing director Bryan Fonseca, because that's one of the big reasons that he was very excited about this play.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that it came along at a time, I know that there have been other times that have been as, very volatile as well, but I know I get stirred up in the last 10 years or so, and I just love that this play does present a very, it's a dichotomy, it's two very opposed people, and yet they're really respectful of one another. And it doesn't happen very often in our culture, or at least if it does, it doesn't happen as loudly as all the other crap that happens. So,
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and humor could serve us well there, as they say. The defense of humor.
I felt like that was the point they
Defenses.
agreed on.
Yes.
That, and then that your jokes aren't funny, but at the end there was one, that's funny.
Yes. Very good. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you all here. Thank you for the opportunity.